What looks like a quiet walk away turns into a brutal moment of abandonment when a powerful CEO leaves his disabled pregnant wife in a rundown house and drives off, ignoring his own 10-year-old son, kneeling in the dirt, begging him to stay. He believes a woman in a wheelchair and a child with no power are nothing more than obstacles on his path to control and ambition. He has no idea that this single act will become the beginning of his collapse. What follows is a slow burn of evidence, silence, and reckoning, where a child's memory becomes a weapon and neglect turns into undeniable truth. Trust me, you will not expect how far this fall goes until we go all the way in. Let us know where you are listening from and what time it is right now, and stay with us as this story unfolds. The old house stood at the edge of the town, its walls flaking in uneven patches, its wooden windows warped by years of neglect. Dust clung to the corners of the room, unmoved, as if even the air had learned not to expect anyone to stay for long. The silence inside was not peaceful. It was hollow, stretched thin by time and waiting. Evelyn Carter sat in the middle of the living room, her wheelchair positioned where a sofa once might have been. The fabric of her light beige maternity dress was worn smooth at the edges, washed too many times, softened by use rather than care. One hand rested instinctively over the curve of her pregnant belly, protective and still, while the other gripped the wheel beside her, fingers tightening as if anchoring herself to the present moment. In front of her, Lucas Carter knelt on the cold floor. His small frame was folded inward, shoulders shaking as he struggled to keep his crying quiet. The faded gray t-shirt he wore hung loosely over his thin arms, and his dark jeans were creased at the knees, where he pressed them into the ground. His hands trembled as they clutched at his mother's legs, not daring to pull, only to hold on. Daniel Carter stood near the doorway, tall and composed in his navy suit and crisp white shirt. The contrast between him and the room was sharp, almost jarring, as if he did not belong to the same reality. He looked at the scene before him without visible emotion, his face set, his posture straight, unmoved by the quiet collapse unfolding just steps away. Evelyn lifted her gaze toward him. Her eyes were tired, dulled by months of pain and waiting, yet something fragile still flickered there. Hope, thin and stubborn, refused to disappear entirely. Her voice came out weak when she spoke, barely more than a breath. She asked if he truly meant to leave like this, if this was really the moment he had chosen. Daniel did not answer. Instead, he adjusted the cuff of his jacket, a small, precise movement, as though preparing himself for an important meeting rather than abandoning his family. The gesture felt deliberate, final. It told her more than words ever could. Lucas looked up then, his face streaked with tears, his eyes wide and red as they searched his father's face. There was fear there, and something close to pleading, though he did not speak. He only waited, hoping for a glance, a pause, anything that might mean his father still saw him. Daniel avoided his son's gaze and turned toward the door. The old hinges groaned as his hand closed around the worn metal handle. The sound cut through the room, sharp and dry, breaking the fragile stillness that had settled between them. Evelyn tried to push herself forward in the wheelchair, her body leaning instinctively toward him, but her arms shook and failed her. The wheels barely moved. She called his name one last time. The sound was hoarse, scraped raw by exhaustion and restraint, as if it had been held back for too long. For a brief moment, Daniel stopped. He stood there, motionless, his back still turned, suspended between staying and leaving. He did not turn around. Daniel stepped out of the house with steady, decisive strides. There was no hesitation in the way he walked, no sign of doubt or regret. The door closed behind him with a dull, final sound, sealing off what little warmth the room had left. Lucas collapsed forward, his head dropping toward the floor as his sobs grew louder. The quiet crying he had tried to contain broke free, filling the empty space with the sound of grief too large for a child's body. Evelyn closed her eyes, her face tightening as she forced herself to breathe through the pain swelling in her chest. Outside, the sound of Daniel's footsteps faded along the gravel path. No neighbors came to their windows. No one stepped outside to ask questions or offer help. The house remained untouched by the world beyond its walls. The silence that followed was complete. Evelyn opened her eyes slowly and looked around the room. The walls, the bare floor, the worn furniture, all felt distant, stripped of meaning. This place was no longer a refuge. It was the end of something she had once believed in, the quiet grave of a marriage she had tried to hold together with patience and hope. Lucas lifted his head, his breathing uneven as he wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at his mother with panic in his eyes, as if asking what would happen now, as if expecting her to have an answer. Evelyn reached out and placed her hand gently on his hair, her touch soft, despite the tremor running through her fingers. Outside, an engine started. The sound was unmistakable. Daniel's car came to life, its low hum growing louder for a moment before receding down the narrow road. Evelyn listened until it was gone, until even the echo of it disappeared into the distance. She knew then that the decision had been made long before today, that this was not something that could be undone. The door had closed, and with it, the life she had once known. The room remained still, heavy with unspoken words and unanswered questions. Nothing moved, nothing changed, and in that suffocating quiet, the moment of abandonment settled into place, marking the beginning of everything that would follow. 6 months earlier, Evelyn Carter could still walk on her own. Pregnancy had slowed her steps, made her movements more deliberate, but her body had not yet betrayed her. She still trusted it. She still believed that if she moved carefully, everything would remain under control. That night, she stood beside Daniel at a major corporate event hosted by the company he led. The venue was polished and bright, filled with glass, steel, and voices layered over one another in constant motion. Cameras flashed intermittently, capturing smiles that were practiced and precise. Evelyn wore a light blue maternity dress, simple but elegant, her hand occasionally brushing against her belly as she stayed close to her husband. She was aware of the attention, of how every step she took felt observed, yet she followed Daniel without hesitation, trusting that he would remain beside her, that he would notice if she faltered. That trust was quiet and unquestioned. The atmosphere shifted suddenly. What began as a minor disruption escalated without warning. Voices rose, movement accelerated. A ripple of panic spread through the room as people surged toward the nearest exits. The carefully maintained order collapsed into urgency and noise. Evelyn felt the pressure of bodies closing in around her. Someone bumped her shoulder. Another brushed past too quickly. Her balance wavered as the floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She tried to steady herself, instinctively reaching out, but the crowd moved faster than her body could respond. She was slipping. Daniel saw it. From only a few steps away, he watched as Evelyn struggled to remain upright, her expression tightening with fear as her center of gravity shifted. For a brief moment, their eyes met. She expected movement, a hand, a step forward, something. Instead, Daniel stepped back. The choice was immediate and unmistakable. He retreated just enough to avoid being pulled into the chaos, his body angling away from her as if shielding himself from the risk of involvement. His focus turned inward, toward preserving his image, his position, his own safety. The impact came hard. Evelyn hit the floor with force, the sound sharp and final against the polished surface. Pain shot through her spine, stealing the air from her lungs. She cried out, instinctively curling inward as her hands clutched at her stomach in terror. The world narrowed to sensation, to the raw awareness of something being deeply wrong. Around her, people froze for a fraction of a second. Faces turned, hands lifted in uncertainty. No one moved quickly enough. Daniel stood still. He did not kneel. He did not reach for her. He remained where he was, eyes scanning the room, already calculating the consequences of staying versus leaving. Within moments, he turned and moved away from the scene, disappearing into the flow of people exiting the venue, careful to avoid cameras, careful to avoid questions. Evelyn was left on the floor. She was taken to the hospital amid confusion and hurried voices. The lights overhead blurred as she was wheeled through corridors, pain radiating through her back in waves that left her shaking. Doctors spoke in measured tones, their words precise but heavy. Tests were run. Images were taken. The diagnosis came quietly, but decisively. Spinal injury, severe impact. The fall had damaged more than muscle and bone. It had altered the way her body would function. Recovery would not be simple. It would not be quick. The baby, they said, was alive, stable, but the pregnancy would require close monitoring, absolute care, no strain. Evelyn woke later in a hospital bed, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling the air. She tried to move her legs and felt only a dull disconnect, a terrifying absence where sensation should have been. Panic rose slowly, restrained only by exhaustion. Daniel appeared briefly. He stood at the foot of the bed, his expression distant, his posture rigid. He spoke in short sentences, vague reassurances that did not quite reach her. He checked his phone more than once. His presence felt obligatory rather than concerned. He left quickly. "Work pressure," he said. "Meetings, deadlines." The company could not afford delays. Evelyn began her recovery in a state of dependence she had never known. Nurses helped her sit up. Doctors explained limitations she did not want to hear. Days blurred together as pain management, physical assessments, and silence filled the hours. The wheelchair was introduced gradually, almost gently, as if the reality could be softened by careful timing. She hated it immediately, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. Daniel did not take her home after the hospital. He arranged for her to stay somewhere else. Temporary, he said, private, away from attention. The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but it carried a weight she could not ignore. Phone calls became irregular. Messages went unanswered longer than before. Each unanswered call pressed a little deeper into her chest. Lucas watched everything. He saw his mother struggle through pain she tried to hide. He heard conversations stop when he entered the room. He sensed the absence of his father without fully understanding it. The change settled into the house quietly, altering the shape of their days. Evelyn understood the truth before she could bring herself to say it aloud. She had been left behind the moment she hit the floor. The wheelchair was no longer just a medical necessity. It became a reminder, a marker of the exact point where protection had failed, where loyalty had broken, where a choice had been made against her. The room grew still as that realization took hold, heavy with an unspoken certainty that nothing would return to the way it had been. After the accident, Daniel Carter maintained the image the public expected to see. He appeared composed, attentive, and responsible whenever cameras were present. His statements were measured. His posture remained confident. From the outside, nothing suggested fracture or failure. He continued to attend board meetings and executive briefings in tailored suits, speaking with certainty about strategy and growth. His schedule appeared full, his presence steady. Colleagues praised his resilience, unaware of what was happening beyond the controlled spaces of conference rooms and press appearances. Evelyn lived in the old house according to Daniel's arrangement. The decision had been framed as temporary, practical, and necessary. The location was quiet, distant from scrutiny, and far removed from the life she once shared with him. She accepted it at first, telling herself it was only a pause, a brief adjustment. In the early months, the financial support arrived consistently. Payments were regular, bills were covered. On the surface, nothing seemed wrong. The predictability allowed Evelyn to breathe, even as her body remained limited and dependent. Daniel visited rarely. When he did, he never stayed long. His explanations were always the same. Meetings ran late, calls could not wait, projects demanded his attention. Each visit ended with the promise of another, one that often failed to materialize. Their conversations changed. They became shorter, restrained, stripped of warmth. Daniel spoke efficiently, focusing on logistics rather than emotion. Evelyn listened, choosing her words carefully, sensing that anything beyond necessity felt unwelcome. The space between them widened without argument or confrontation. Isolation settled in slowly. Evelyn noticed it first in the quiet moments, when days passed without meaningful interaction. The phone sat untouched for long stretches. Messages remained unanswered longer than before. When Daniel did respond, his tone felt distant, distracted, as if she were an obligation rather than a partner. Lucas saw the change as well. He asked about his father less frequently. The questions that once came naturally faded into silence. When Daniel did appear, Lucas hovered uncertainly, unsure of how to behave, unsure of what was expected of him. The familiarity between them eroded quietly. 3 months after the accident, the financial support shifted. The amounts decreased gradually, never abruptly enough to provoke immediate alarm. Daniel explained the changes calmly, citing temporary challenges within the company, market fluctuations, delayed projects, necessary adjustments. His words sounded reasonable, even sympathetic. Evelyn had no access to the shared accounts. She could not verify the explanations. She could only accept them. Every expense required approval. Every request passed through Daniel. Independence slipped away piece by piece, replaced by dependence she could neither escape nor openly challenge. The control became complete. Evelyn felt it in small details: the timing of payments, the limits placed on spending, the absence of choice. She was no longer managing her life. She was waiting for permission to continue it. Then came the documents. Daniel asked her to sign several financial papers, presenting them as routine. He explained that they were necessary to simplify management, to reduce stress, to ensure stability while she recovered. His voice remained steady. His expressions gave nothing away. Evelyn signed. She did so while exhausted, physically weak, emotionally worn down by months of uncertainty. She trusted the explanation because challenging it felt impossible. There was no independent legal counsel, no alternative voice. Only Daniel's assurance and the weight of dependence. Public appearances shifted soon after. Daniel began appearing openly with Sophia Reed. At events, she stood beside him in a wine-red dress, composed and confident. Cameras captured them together with increasing frequency. The contrast was unmistakable. The media noticed. Questions emerged. Articles speculated. The absence of Evelyn became a topic of quiet discussion. Daniel offered no official explanation. He neither confirmed nor denied anything. Silence became his chosen response. Evelyn understood what that silence meant. She recognized it as distance made deliberate, as erasure executed without confrontation. She was no longer part of the life Daniel presented to the world. She existed outside the frame, unseen and unacknowledged. Lucas heard things. Adults spoke carelessly when they thought he was not listening. Fragments of conversation drifted into his awareness. Names, assumptions, judgments. He began to understand that the structure of his family had changed, even if no one explained how or why. Daniel limited Evelyn's contact with the outside world. Visits became rare. Communication narrowed. Decisions were made without her input. Matters that once involved discussion were now handled unilaterally. Evelyn felt herself being pushed further from relevance with each passing week. The process was subtle, but relentless. There were no arguments, no declarations, no dramatic breaks, only a steady withdrawal, a quiet redirection of life away from her. The absence of conflict made it harder to name, harder to resist. Evelyn eventually recognized the truth. This was not temporary distance, it was removal. She had not been left behind accidentally. She had been moved aside deliberately, gradually displaced from the life she once shared. Daniel was not drifting away. He was creating a clean separation, one measured step at a time. The realization settled heavily. Evelyn sat in the stillness of the old house, listening to the quiet that followed every unanswered call, every delayed message, every decision made without her. The pattern was unmistakable now. She had been removed from Daniel's life long before the moment he finally walked away. Lucas Carter slowly understood that his father's absence was no longer temporary. At 10 years old, he did not have the language to explain it, but he felt the pattern settle into his days. Promises that once came with certainty now arrived thin and hollow, then stopped arriving at all. Each time Daniel said he would come back and did not, the space where trust used to sit grew quieter and heavier. Lucas noticed the silence before he understood its meaning. He began to remember clearly every time Daniel failed to return as promised. The memories did not blur together. They lined up, one after another, distinct and sharp, A night when the front door never opened. A weekend that passed without footsteps on the porch. A phone call that ended too quickly. Lucas kept these moments in his mind, not as accusations, but as facts he could not ignore. Every evening, Lucas watched his mother sit in her wheelchair by the window. The house was old and worn, and the light outside faded early. Evelyn would look out through the cracked glass, as if she were waiting for something she already knew would not come. Her hands rested on her belly, her posture still, her breathing controlled. The quiet stretched long, filling the room with something unspoken. Lucas sat nearby, careful not to interrupt that silence. Evelyn tried to appear calm in front of her son. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed her dress, and spoke in a steady voice. But Lucas could see the strain behind her eyes. Her strength felt borrowed, held together for his sake. When she smiled, it did not reach her gaze. When she spoke of tomorrow, her words sounded rehearsed rather than hopeful. Lucas noticed that his mother often stayed awake through the night. He would wake and hear her shifting in pain, her breathing uneven. The injury to her back left her uncomfortable, but the worry for her unborn child kept her alert even when her body begged for rest. Lucas lay still, listening, pretending to sleep, learning more in those hours than he ever had during the day. Without being asked, Lucas began to do small tasks around the house. He cleaned, carried light objects, and brought his mother water when she needed it. He learned how to move quietly, how to make himself useful without drawing attention. These actions were not heroic. They were practical, instinctive, and born from a growing awareness that his role in the house had changed. The questions Lucas once asked about his father slowly faded. He no longer asked when Daniel would visit or why he had not called. The absence became a condition of daily life rather than a mystery to be solved. Curiosity gave way to acceptance, though the acceptance was heavy and incomplete. Sometimes Lucas overheard short phone calls between his mother and Daniel. He did not mean to listen, but the walls were thin and the house carried sound easily. Daniel's voice came through cold and distant, clipped and controlled. Each time Lucas heard it, his chest tightened. The tone frightened him more than raised voices ever could. It carried finality. Packages began to arrive by mail. Inside were documents that Evelyn would read carefully before signing. Lucas watched as his mother studied each page, her brow tightening, her hands trembling slightly. When she signed, it was with visible exhaustion, not confidence. Lucas did not know what the papers meant, but he sensed their weight. After each signature, Lucas noticed a shift in his mother's expression. A quiet unease lingered, something unresolved. He saw the doubt that crossed her face when she set the papers aside. She said nothing, but Lucas understood that these decisions were not freely made. At times, Evelyn cried softly when she believed Lucas was not watching. He saw her wipe her face quickly, composing herself before he entered the room. These moments etched themselves into his memory. He learned the difference between visible pain and hidden suffering. Lucas began keeping a small notebook. The pages were filled with uneven handwriting and simple observations. He wrote about days, about silence, about waiting. He did not write with intention beyond remembering. He recorded what happened because it felt important that someone did. In the notebook, Lucas noted that his father had not visited in weeks. He wrote about the moment he saw Daniel turn away from the house, walking out without looking back. That image stayed with him, fixed and unchanging. It became one of the clearest memories he possessed. These recollections did not fade with time. Instead, they grew more defined. Lucas did not know that memory could serve a purpose beyond pain. He only knew that forgetting felt like losing something essential. Evelyn remained unaware of how much her son observed. She did not realize that Lucas was storing each detail with careful attention. To her, he was still a child trying to adjust. To Lucas, the world had shifted, and he was adjusting by remembering. Gradually, Lucas began to see his father as a stranger. The familiarity dissolved, replaced by distance. He no longer expected calls or messages. When the phone rang, he did not hope it was Daniel. The absence became normal. Evelyn noticed that her son matured quickly. His questions changed. His silence grew more thoughtful. The house itself seemed quieter. heavier with unspoken truths. The air carried the weight of things unresolved. Lucas became the clearest witness to the abandonment, not because he understood it fully, but because he saw it without distortion. He observed without the defenses adults build to protect themselves. He remembered without justification or excuse. What Lucas recorded was simple and unaltered, the truth as it occurred. Over time, these memories took shape as something more than recollection. They became evidence, though he did not yet know it. As the days passed, Evelyn still did not recognize the importance of her son's quiet vigilance. She did not know that the future of their family would one day hinge on what Lucas remembered. Lucas himself did not understand that his memory would carry weight beyond his own heart. That night, Lucas closed his notebook and placed it carefully beside his bed. The house remained still, wrapped in silence. Outside, the world continued on, unaware of the quiet record being kept within those walls. Michael Hayes learned about Evelyn Carter's condition by chance. A brief mention during a professional conversation, a name that lingered longer than it should have, and a detail that unsettled him enough to ask follow-up questions. By the end of the day, he knew she was living quietly on the outskirts of town, injured, pregnant, and largely forgotten. The information did not sit well with him, especially given how well he had once known her family. Years earlier, Michael had served as a legal advisor to Evelyn's parents. He remembered her as steady, thoughtful, and careful. The contrast between that memory and what he was now hearing compelled him to act. Without announcing his visit or seeking permission, he drove to the address he had been given, arriving at the old house late in the afternoon when the light was already beginning to fade. Evelyn welcomed him into the worn living room, seated in her wheelchair, wearing a pale gray maternity dress that hung loosely against her frame. The house felt tired, the furniture aged, the air quiet in a way that suggested long stretches without conversation. Michael took in the details without comment, noting the narrow space, the uneven floor, and the way Evelyn positioned herself as if to take up as little room as possible. His eyes settled briefly on the wheelchair. The sight carried weight. It did not align with the life Evelyn had once lived. He did not ask immediately about the injury. Instead, he listened, observing the careful way she spoke, the restraint in her movements, and the guarded calm in her expression. It became clear to him that this was not simply a matter of misfortune, but of displacement. Michael eventually asked about the accident and the documents Evelyn had been signing since then. His tone remained neutral, professional, and calm. Evelyn responded without hesitation. Her voice was tired, but her account was precise. She described the event, the aftermath, the hospital, and the papers that followed. There was no drama in her delivery, only resignation. Lucas sat nearby, quiet and attentive. He did not interrupt. His presence, however, was unmistakable. Michael noticed how the boy watched his mother, how his posture changed when certain details were mentioned. Each reaction was subtle, but consistent. Michael understood quickly that Lucas had been paying close attention for a long time. As Evelyn spoke, Michael recognized patterns he had seen before. Delayed explanations, administrative pressure presented as necessity, documents framed as routine. He asked to see the papers she had signed. Evelyn retrieved them carefully, her hands steady but hesitant. She placed them on the table one by one, as though unsure whether she should have kept them at all. Michael reviewed the documents in silence. The longer he read, the more concerned he became. The language was complex, the clauses restrictive, and the absence of independent legal counsel glaring. Several provisions transferred control without clear justification. Others limited access and decision-making authority in ways that were neither temporary nor protective. He explained his findings to Evelyn slowly, choosing his words with care. He told her that many of the documents could be challenged, that their validity was questionable given her condition and the lack of proper advisement. As he spoke, Evelyn's posture shifted. It was not relief yet, but recognition. The possibility of another outcome had not occurred to her before this moment. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest. The path ahead was still unclear, but the certainty of being trapped began to fade. Michael assured her that he would assist as an independent attorney, separate from any previous representation connected to Daniel. His commitment was measured and deliberate, grounded in process rather than emotion. He advised Evelyn to preserve every document, every message, and every record related to the accident and the subsequent decisions. Nothing, he said, should be discarded or overlooked. Evelyn nodded, absorbing the instruction with quiet seriousness. Michael then turned his attention to Lucas. He asked the boy what he had seen. The question was simple, without pressure. Lucas answered carefully, recounting events exactly as he remembered them. He did not exaggerate. He did not speculate. He described what he had observed, when he had observed it, and who had been present. Michael listened without interruption. The consistency of Lucas's account stood out immediately. There were no contradictions, no hesitation. Each detail aligned with Evelyn's timeline. Michael understood then that the child was not merely a bystander. He was a witness whose clarity came from observation rather than interpretation. Recognizing the importance of this, Michael made a mental note to protect Lucas's role in whatever followed. He did not explain this to the boy, only thanked him for speaking honestly. Before leaving, Michael informed Evelyn that he would begin obtaining medical records related to the accident. Hospital documentation, he explained, would be essential in establishing what had occurred and what had not. Evelyn agreed, her consent given without resistance. As Michael stood to leave, the atmosphere in the house felt different. Nothing had changed materially, but the sense of absolute isolation had eased. Lucas noticed it too. The silence no longer felt as heavy. Michael gathered the documents carefully and placed them into his briefcase. He looked once more at Evelyn, offering reassurance without promises. Then he left the house, carrying the files with him, the door closing softly behind him as the room settled into a new, uncertain quiet. Michael Hayes began by reconstructing the entire timeline of events with precision. He laid out each moment from the day of the accident through the period of abandonment, arranging dates, times, and locations in a methodical sequence. Nothing was assumed. Every detail was checked, cross-referenced, and anchored to a verifiable source. The work was slow, deliberate, and exacting. He compiled a comprehensive case file that traced the progression from injury to isolation. Hospital intake records, discharge summaries, and follow-up notes established a clear medical narrative. The documentation confirmed that Evelyn Carter had suffered a serious spinal injury consistent with a heavy fall and subsequent impact. The language was clinical and unemotional, yet the implications were unmistakable. Michael noted a critical absence within those records. There was no indication that Daniel Carter had been present to assist or advocate during the immediate aftermath of the accident. Staff notes referenced companions and emergency responders, but Daniel's name appeared only later and briefly. This absence aligned with what Evelyn had described, but Michael sought independent confirmation. Witness statements from the event where the accident occurred supported the same conclusion. Multiple accounts indicated that Daniel had left early. He had not remained to ensure his wife's safety when the situation escalated. These statements were consistent, independent, and recorded without coordination. Michael added them to the growing file. Financial documents followed. Michael gathered authorization forms, account transfers, and internal memos connected to delegated financial control. The dates were critical. Each document bore a signature from Evelyn during a period when she was still under medical care. The timing raised immediate concerns about capacity and consent. There was no evidence of independent legal counsel advising Evelyn at the time of signing. No attorney of record appeared on the documents. No separate consultation was documented. Michael concluded that these instruments lacked the safeguards required for validity. He documented this finding carefully, citing relevant statutes and precedent. To reinforce the timeline, Michael invited Lucas to recount what he had seen, step by step. The conversation was conducted calmly, with Evelyn present and consenting. Lucas spoke without embellishment, describing events in sequence. His recollection matched the medical records and the witness statements with striking consistency. Lucas described the moment his father turned away and left the house. He recalled the posture, the direction, and the silence that followed. His voice remained steady as he spoke, though his hands tightened in his lap. Michael recorded the statement with care, ensuring clarity and consent at every step. Michael then turned to public records and media coverage. Images showed Daniel Carter attending major events alongside Sophia Reed. The dates overlapped with the period of Evelyn's recovery and isolation. The contrast was stark. Michael archived the articles and photographs, noting their publication dates and sources. Financial analysis revealed additional patterns. Transfers had been initiated before the physical separation became apparent. Accounts were reorganized. Assets were repositioned. Each transaction alone might have seemed routine, but together they formed a coherent pattern of preparation. Michael connected these movements, mapping intent through sequence. All collected data pointed toward deliberate action rather than coincidence. The injury, the absence, the documents, and the financial restructuring formed a continuous line. Michael summarized these findings in a preliminary analysis, framing them within applicable legal standards. Evelyn was informed of the progress carefully and without dramatization. Michael explained that the process would be lengthy and demanding. He emphasized the importance of stability, especially given her pregnancy. Evelyn listened, absorbing the information with quiet resolve. Lucas sensed the shift. The truth was taking shape, no longer scattered or uncertain. He did not fully understand the legal mechanisms, but he understood that what he remembered mattered. That realization brought both relief and gravity. Daniel remained unaware of the work being done. He continued his public appearances, encouraged by Sophia to focus on his career. There was no indication that he suspected a case was forming. This lack of awareness allowed Michael to proceed without interference. Michael completed a preliminary legal brief outlining the grounds for action. The analysis addressed abandonment, lack of protection during a foreseeable risk, invalid financial instruments, and premeditated asset movement. Each point was supported by documented evidence. The file demonstrated a clear pattern of willful neglect. The conclusion was not emotional, but factual. Michael reviewed the materials one final time, ensuring completeness and accuracy. Evelyn prepared herself mentally for the next step. She understood that confrontation would follow, but she also understood that the foundation was solid. There was no turning back, only moving forward. Michael assembled the documents into a formal submission. The case was ready. With measured calm, he filed the lawsuit with the court, and the room fell into a heavy, expectant silence as the process moved beyond preparation and into action. The lawsuit was formally accepted by the court as a serious civil case. The notification marked a shift from preparation to confrontation, turning months of quiet documentation into a matter of public record. From that moment forward, the conflict was no longer contained within files and private meetings. It had entered an arena where truth would be tested under scrutiny. Evelyn Carter appeared at her lawyer's office on the morning of the hearing, wearing a light cream maternity dress and a simple, well-fitted coat. Her posture was upright despite the wheelchair, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She did not avert her gaze from anyone in the room. The choice was deliberate. She had spent too long being invisible. Michael Hayes laid out the legal grounds of the case with precision. His voice was even, his arguments structured, each point tied directly to documented evidence. He framed the case not as an emotional dispute, but as a clear question of responsibility, neglect, and unlawful control. The language was measured, yet the implications were severe. Daniel Carter received the court notice while seated in a boardroom with senior executives. The interruption irritated him. He read the document quickly, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the implications. He masked his reaction well, straightening his posture and maintaining a confident demeanor. To those around him, he appeared inconvenienced rather than threatened. When Daniel arrived at court, he wore a tailored black suit and carried himself with cold composure. His expression revealed little, his movements controlled. He took his place without hesitation, as though the setting were another professional engagement. The familiarity of authority followed him into the room. Sophia Reed entered alongside him, dressed in a wine-red gown that drew attention without apology. Her posture was relaxed, her smile faint and assured. She surveyed the room with an air of confidence, as though the proceedings were a formality rather than a risk. Her presence did not go unnoticed. Media outlets quickly shifted their focus. Cameras turned toward Evelyn, noting her return after months of absence. The image of her in the wheelchair, composed and visibly pregnant, contrasted sharply with earlier narratives. The attention was immediate and intense. Michael formally requested that the court review the full accident record from the beginning. He emphasized the necessity of examining the sequence of events rather than isolated moments. His request was granted without delay. Medical documentation was presented before the panel. Reports detailed the nature of Evelyn's spinal injury, the severity of the impact, and the circumstances surrounding the incident. The language was clinical, but the conclusion was clear. The injury occurred during a foreseeable risk scenario. The records further demonstrated that Daniel had failed to fulfill a basic duty of protection during a dangerous situation. The omission was not framed as malicious, but as negligent. Michael allowed the facts to speak for themselves. Evelyn listened to the proceedings with calm attentiveness. Her expression remained steady, though her eyes reflected resolve rather than detachment. She did not interrupt or react outwardly. The strength she displayed was quiet, rooted in endurance rather than defiance. Daniel rejected responsibility when given the opportunity to respond. He characterized the accident as unforeseeable and outside his control. His tone was firm, his denial absolute. He did not look toward Evelyn as he spoke. Michael countered with witness accounts and event data that contradicted Daniel's claim. He highlighted inconsistencies and emphasized the timeline. The argument was direct and methodical, leaving little room for ambiguity. Lucas Carter was officially recognized as a directly related witness. Due to his age, he was not present in the courtroom, but his recorded testimony was accepted into evidence. The acknowledgement carried weight, affirming the legitimacy of his observations. The court ordered Daniel to produce all financial records related to the marriage. The request extended beyond basic disclosures, encompassing accounts, transfers, and authorizations. The scope was broad and non-negotiable. For the first time, Daniel appeared unsettled. The demand shifted the balance. His confidence wavered slightly, though he quickly recovered. The pressure was now tangible. Sophia's demeanor changed as the session extended longer than expected. Her patience thinned, her expression tightening as the legal focus deepened. The proceedings no longer felt performative. Reporters noted the subtle shift in Daniel's attitude after the hearing. The controlled assurance he had displayed earlier gave way to visible strain. Observers recorded the change. Evelyn exited the courtroom with Michael's assistance. She did not speak to Daniel, nor did she acknowledge his presence. The decision was intentional, preserving distance and control. Outside, Lucas waited anxiously. When he saw his mother, his shoulders eased. Evelyn reached for his hand, offering reassurance through touch rather than words. The moment passed quietly. Daniel watched them from across the space. The image lingered longer than he expected. For the first time, he recognized that his influence no longer extended to that small, intact unit. Michael began preparing for the next phase immediately. The case had moved beyond preliminary arguments. Evidence would now determine outcome. The legal confrontation had fully begun. As the court scheduled the next hearing, the atmosphere settled into a tense stillness, carrying the weight of what was yet to come. The next hearing drew a full gallery, cameras lining the back of the courtroom and reporters filling every available seat. The attention was no longer speculative. It was fixed, expectant, and focused on what would finally be revealed. The air felt tighter than before, charged with the sense that something irreversible was about to surface. Evelyn Carter entered wearing a pastel maternity dress, neatly tailored, her hair carefully arranged. She moved with measured composure, guiding her wheelchair into place without assistance. The calm in her expression was deliberate. She had learned that steadiness carried its own authority. The room noticed. Daniel Carter followed moments later, his face more strained than at previous hearings. The practiced confidence he once wore so easily now required effort. His gaze moved quickly, scanning faces, avoiding the cameras when possible. He took his seat with restrained tension, his posture rigid. Sophia Reed arrived separately. She did not sit beside Daniel this time. The distance between them was small in space but unmistakable in meaning. When the photographers turned their lenses toward her, she looked away, her expression tight, her movements careful. Michael Hayes began by presenting the financial evidence in full. He spoke clearly, without embellishment, guiding the court through a sequence of transactions that formed a coherent narrative. Dates, amounts, and authorizations appeared on the screens. Each transfer followed the last with unsettling precision. The unusual asset movements were displayed one by one. Accounts had been rearranged, control had shifted. The timing aligned closely with Evelyn's hospitalization and recovery period. Michael allowed the pattern to stand on its own, pausing only to clarify technical points when asked. The court confirmed the dates on which the financial authorization addenda had been signed. Those dates overlapped directly with Evelyn's medical treatment. Hospital records were referenced, establishing her condition at the time. The alignment was undeniable. Further documentation demonstrated that Evelyn had not received independent legal counsel before signing any of the addenda. There was no record of consultation, no notation of advisement, and no indication that alternatives had been explained. The absence spoke as loudly as any testimony. Michael formally requested that the court invalidate all financial addenda executed during that period. The request was grounded in statute, precedent, and documented incapacity. The legal framework was clear, and the argument required no dramatic emphasis. Daniel's attorney struggled to counter the presentation. Objections were raised, but they lacked cohesion. Each attempt to reframe the evidence fell short under direct questioning. The defense shifted focus repeatedly, searching for ground that did not exist. Attention then returned to the accident. Medical reports were placed alongside witness statements. The sequence of events was reconstructed carefully. Data confirmed that Daniel had left the event before assistance reached Evelyn. The timeline did not bend. Lucas Carter's testimony was introduced next. The recording played without interruption. His voice was steady, his recollection precise. He described what he had seen, when he had seen it, and what followed. There were no contradictions, no hesitation, no embellishment. The content of Lucas's statement demonstrated consistency across every detail. The panel listened closely. When the recording ended, the room remained silent for several seconds. The clarity of the account required no interpretation. The judges conferred briefly. Their acknowledgement was formal and measured. Lucas was recognized as a witness of high credibility. The designation carried weight, affirming that truth could be preserved through careful memory. Daniel's composure fractured visibly. He attempted to regain control, adjusting his posture, pressing his hands together. The effort was transparent. His calm no longer convinced even himself. Sophia kept her eyes lowered, her attention fixed on the table before her. The cameras continued to flash, capturing the subtle shift in her demeanor. The confidence she once displayed had faded into visible unease. Michael emphasized the prolonged nature of the neglect. He outlined how the absence of protection during the accident had been followed by months of administrative control and emotional withdrawal. The behavior, he argued, was not accidental. It was sustained. He cited the relevant statutes governing marital duty and financial consent. Each provision was read into the record with precision. The law left little room for interpretation. The court recessed to deliberate. The pause stretched, filling the room with a heavy stillness. Evelyn remained composed, her hands resting calmly, her breathing even. She had learned patience through necessity. Daniel sat motionless, his jaw clenched, his fingers interlaced tightly. The waiting pressed in on him. For the first time, uncertainty overtook calculation. Sophia shifted in her seat, her earlier detachment replaced by visible concern. The distance she had placed between herself and Daniel now felt insufficient. When the panel returned, the courtroom rose. The ruling was delivered without flourish. The financial authorization addenda were declared fully invalid. Daniel's control over the assets was terminated, effective immediately. The reaction was immediate but contained. Cameras captured the moment. Reporters scribbled notes. The shift was unmistakable. Control had changed hands. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, exhaling as though releasing a weight she had carried alone. She did not smile. Relief came quietly, without display. The court announced that the final sentencing hearing would be scheduled. No further commentary followed. The gavel struck once, firm and final, for the moment. As the room emptied, the air remained tense, heavy with anticipation. The truth had been laid bare, and the silence that followed carried the promise of what was still to come. The sentencing hearing took place in absolute silence. No side conversations, no shifting chairs, no whispered commentary broke the stillness. The courtroom felt suspended, as if everyone present understood that the words about to be spoken would permanently alter the course of several lives. Even the cameras seemed restrained, their lenses fixed, waiting. Evelyn Carter entered with a composed presence. Her posture was steady, her expression calm, and her gaze unwavering. There was no tension in her movements, no trace of fear. She had already endured the worst months of uncertainty. What remained now was resolution. She positioned her wheelchair with quiet confidence, hands resting lightly, breathing even. Daniel Carter arrived moments later. His suit was a muted gray, slightly wrinkled despite careful tailoring. The signs of strain were visible in the tightness of his jaw and the stiffness of his shoulders. He avoided looking toward Evelyn. The familiar sense of command he once carried into every room was absent, replaced by guarded restraint. Sophia Reed did not appear beside him. Her absence was conspicuous. The empty space where she once sat felt deliberate, a visual acknowledgement that alliances dissolve quickly when power does. Daniel took his seat alone, the separation unmistakable. The judicial panel entered, and the room rose. When everyone sat again, the presiding judge began reading the legal conclusions. The voice was measured and neutral, delivering findings without emphasis. The facts were restated clearly, tracing the legal reasoning step by step. The court determined that Daniel Carter had committed a serious breach of marital duty. The failure to protect his pregnant wife during a foreseeable dangerous situation was cited directly. The prolonged abandonment that followed was recognized as intentional neglect rather than circumstance. The ruling emphasized that exploiting a partner's physical and financial dependence constituted a severe violation. The attempt to consolidate control during Evelyn's recovery was not excused as administrative necessity. It was identified as calculated advantage-taking. The court declared all remaining financial control previously exercised by Daniel null and void. The decision was firm and immediate. Authority shifted entirely, without delay or exception. All marital assets were ordered to be transferred to Evelyn Carter. The ruling did not frame this as compensation or punishment. It was presented as rectification, restoring balance where it had been deliberately disrupted. Daniel absorbed the words in silence. His face remained still, but his eyes lost focus. The reality settled slowly, each sentence stripping away what remained of his former position. Within hours, the consequences extended beyond the courtroom. Daniel's removal as CEO was finalized. Corporate partners issued statements distancing themselves. Contracts were terminated. The professional identity he had guarded so fiercely unraveled with methodical efficiency. Daniel stood motionless as the ruling concluded. There was no outburst, no protest, no plea. His stillness reflected disbelief rather than composure. The weight of finality pressed down without spectacle. Evelyn did not react outwardly. She did not smile, nor did she look toward Daniel. Her calm was not indifference, but completion. She had reached the end of a struggle that had consumed her silently. Lucas Carter stood beside his mother, his posture relaxed, his expression neutral. He did not turn to look at his father. The choice was quiet and instinctive. It carried more meaning than confrontation ever could. Daniel noticed. The realization struck deeper than the legal defeat. The absence of his son's gaze felt heavier than the loss of status or wealth. The silence from Lucas was final, unarguable. Media coverage followed swiftly. Headlines documented the total collapse of Daniel's authority. Analysts dissected the downfall, framing it as inevitable in hindsight. Public opinion shifted decisively, leaving no ambiguity. Sophia Reed withdrew completely from public view. Appearances were cancelled, associations severed. Her disappearance was swift and thorough, as though the chapter had never existed. Daniel exited the courtroom alone. The echo of his footsteps faded quickly, unaccompanied. No aides followed, no allies waited. The isolation was complete. Evelyn was formally confirmed as the sole legal guardian of her children. The ruling acknowledged her stability, resilience, and capacity. The recognition felt procedural, but it carried profound significance. Michael Hayes concluded his legal responsibilities quietly. There were no celebrations or statements. He met Evelyn's eyes briefly and inclined his head. The acknowledgement was sufficient. Evelyn returned the gesture with a small nod. Gratitude did not need words. It was contained in the outcome itself. As she left the building, Lucas took her hand. His grip was firm, reassuring. They moved forward together, their pace unhurried. Daniel remained on the courthouse steps. He stood apart, watching from a distance as mother and son disappeared into the crowd. The separation was physical now, undeniable. No one stood beside him. No one spoke his name. The silence around him was complete. There was no dramatic collapse, no raised voices, no public humiliation. The downfall occurred without spectacle, without resistance. The power Daniel had pursued dissolved quietly, leaving nothing behind. He remained there, alone, as the space around him emptied. And the image of him standing forgotten marked the end of everything he believed he controlled. Morning arrived quietly. Soft daylight filled the new house, sliding through wide windows and resting gently on pale walls. Evelyn Carter stood near the glass, facing outward, her posture upright and steady. The calm inside the room was not fragile. It was settled, earned. She wore a light cream maternity dress that fell cleanly over her frame, the fabric simple and unadorned, matching the clarity in her expression. There was no tension in her shoulders, no hesitation in the way she held herself. She breathed evenly, as if each breath confirmed something already decided. The wheelchair rested to one side of the room, placed neatly near the wall. It was present, but no longer central. It no longer defined the space or the moment. The doctor's confirmation echoed quietly in her thoughts. She could walk now with minimal support. The words had not arrived with drama or celebration, only certainty. Evelyn took a step forward, then another, her pace slow but deliberate. Each movement was careful, not from fear, but from respect for her own recovery. The floor beneath her feet felt solid, clean, dependable. Lucas Carter stood nearby, watching without anxiety. His gaze was calm, observant, steady in a way that no longer belonged to a frightened child. He wore a light-colored shirt tucked neatly into well-fitted trousers. His posture was relaxed, his presence quiet. There was no trace left of the boy who once knelt in silence in an old house filled with shadows. He had grown into someone who understood stillness without fear. Evelyn placed one hand gently over her belly and inhaled deeply. The motion was unhurried, grounded. Her breathing settled into a slow rhythm that carried reassurance rather than uncertainty. The future was no longer something she braced against. It was something she faced. Elsewhere, the legal confirmation existed not as a threat or a victory, but as fact. The document stated clearly that all assets had been transferred lawfully into Evelyn's control. There was no ambiguity left in the language. Ownership had been settled. Responsibility had been defined. The former structure of Daniel Carter's company had already begun to shift, reorganized under new management that carried no trace of his influence. On a distant street, Daniel appeared almost unrecognizable. His clothes were worn, his steps heavy. There was no driver waiting, no assistant trailing behind him. He walked alone. When he stopped in front of a familiar office building, his gaze lifted slowly. The name that once stood proudly above the entrance was gone. The sign had been removed long ago, leaving behind only faint marks where it had been mounted. He stood there in silence, unnoticed by those passing around him. No one recognized him. No one paused. The absence of attention was complete. In that stillness, Daniel understood something he had never allowed himself to consider before. Power left no residue once it vanished. It did not linger. It did not wait. It disappeared entirely. Back in the quiet office across town, Evelyn signed the final documents with steady hands. Her signature did not waver. Each page was turned carefully, each line read with focus. Michael Hayes observed without comment. When the last paper was completed, he closed the folder with a controlled motion. His task was finished. Evelyn thanked him with a brief handshake. There was no excess gratitude, only acknowledgement. Lucas stepped forward and took his mother's hand. The gesture was simple, natural, unforced. Together, they left the room without looking back. The door closed softly behind them, sealing a chapter without announcement. Daniel moved through crowded streets as the day progressed. People passed him in all directions, absorbed in their own lives. He attempted to call familiar numbers, one after another. Each call ended the same way. No answer, no return. The silence on the other end of the line carried more weight than rejection. It confirmed what he already knew. He had been removed from the world he once controlled. The realization did not arrive with anger or protest. It arrived quietly. He understood that the system he built had never been designed to keep him. It only functioned while he held something others wanted. Once that disappeared, so did his place within it. Lucas looked up at his mother as they walked. His eyes carried trust without condition. Evelyn met his gaze briefly, then looked forward again. Her expression remained calm. There was no triumph in her face, no bitterness. She did not speak of blame. She did not seek acknowledgement for endurance. Silence was enough. The one who left had lost everything he once believed stood in his way. The one who stayed carried what remained forward. The house filled again with light as the day continued, and within that light, the future moved quietly, firmly, into capable hands.